Grixis Midrange is a really powerful deck. So much so that 26.6% of standard players thinks it's the best deck in the format based on meta share, and for good reason. Nathan Stoyer put on a show at the most recent Magic the Gathering World Championship with the deck against many of the most skilled players in the world, winning the entire event as the only Grixis Midrange build in the top 4.
Invoke Despair for the win.
It's just a matter of time, and there's Invoke Despair. Nathan Stoyer is your world champion.
After Worlds, the deck skyrocketed in popularity, becoming the most played deck by meta share percentage by a mile. But that percentage is getting smaller and smaller over time, as players have figured out the play patterns, which cards to prepare for, and which cards are good against the deck. New decks have become more popular that have cracked the Grixis code, and it's only a matter of time before a new deck rises to the top of the format. Decks like Mono White Midrange and Esper Legends are already beginning to make this jump in the meta, increasing in popularity in many tournament top 8s. Here in this video, I'll take you on a journey through a tournament I recently played with Grixis Midrange to show you just what I mean, and show you that this once dominant deck is very beatable and might soon be dethroned. Alright, strap in because this can get super grindy. We're in a tournament, we're in round 1 against Mono White Midrange, we're in game 3, games 1 and 2 already lasted forever, and you just wait until you see this one. We start out with a Haunted Ridge tapped, we have Blackcleave Cliffs and Sulfurous Springs in hand. Opponent starts with the plains. We play our Blackcleave Cliffs. We don't have blue mana right now, but that's okay. We can eventually draw blue mana since we don't have that little of blue sources in the deck. We have Corpse Appraiser and Make Disappear in our hand that we can't use, but we still have Abrade to kill a creature or to kill a Reckoner Bankbuster in the future. We draw Invoke Despair off the top, which isn't super awesome since we don't have 5 mana yet, but they do cast Reckoner Bankbuster, which we will hit with that Abrade. We take 1 damage from Ambitious Farmhand, and try to draw a blue source to try to cast Corpse Appraiser or hold up Make Disappear. We draw a Disdainful Stroke, which is definitely not good, but it's good in general, so I don't mind having it in the hand. Any black source or any land period off the top that's untapped lets us cast Invoke Despair, which I like, and also any black or red card lets us cast that off the top anyway. We have Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, which is one of the better ones. We make our 2/2 and just hope that doesn't die, so we can make a treasure token to cast our blue spells, or if we don't draw a land, we can cast Invoke Despair. On our end step, opponent draws with Reckoner Bankbuster, and hopefully our opponent just doesn't get rid of the 2/2. Our opponent apparently just was listening to us and gets rid of it immediately with a Brutal Cathar out of the sideboard, which is not music to my ears. Opponent plays a naked ossification, which is interesting. Either opponent was playing around us apparently having Invoke Despair, or they were looking at our hand, which I know they weren't. We draw our Shipwreck Marsh off the top, so we don't have to discard anything with Fable the Mirrorbreaker to try to dig to a land or a blue source, so that's good. We fire off Invoke Despair and they sacrifice Ossification, unfortunately, and they do sacrifice their Ambitious Farmhand. We get to draw a card, and we draw a Xander's Lounge. We have our second blue source, which is good because we have Corpse Appraiser plus holding up a counterspell back up in a couple turns. Opponent casts a Serra Paragon, which, if you see my face, it's not a good sight. They cast the Reckoner Bankbuster out of the graveyard again that we already got rid of with Abrade, so this is looking really, really bad. They get in for 6 damage while crewing the Serra Paragon with the Bankbuster. We draw Takenuma off the top and flip Fable the Mirrorbreaker into Reflection of Kiki-Jiki. We go ahead and cast Corpse Appraiser to try to draw an answer to Serra Paragon or Bankbuster or Brutal Cathar, and don't find any of them. Bloodtithe Harvester is the closest one out of all 3 of those, so let's go ahead and cast it so we can at least have a blocker if they have a removal spell so we don't just die immediately. We have a Xander's Lounge, so we play that tapped, and we can't hold up any mana, so our opponent casts Ossification, getting rid of Reflection of Kiki-Jiki. That's not good. What's even worse is the opponent goes ahead and casts another Ossification, so that's 3 Ossifications in their hand. How do we ever beat that? Well, this mono white deck has a ton of removal, so that's basically expected. Reckoner Bankbuster is crewed with the Sarah Paragon, getting in for 4. I don't choose to block it because although we do go to 3, we have a play that we can sacrifice the Bloodtithe Harvester to get rid of the Bladecoil and then cast Invoke Despair to make them sacrifice their Sarah Paragon and sacrifice one of their ossifications, giving us back either our Corpse Appraiser or our Fable of the Mirror Breaker and drawing an additional card, which I really like. We also have the other untapped land to cast the Invoke Despair plus hold up Disdainful Stroke and make disappear back up, which could get us out of it. I mean, we're at 3 life and there's 2 Bankbusters. At any point in the game, they can attack with one of those Bankbusters and we'll lose the game instantly. We draw Blackcleave Cliffs off of our Invoke Despair, which is not a good sight, but at least we can discard it with Fable of the Mirror Breaker's second trigger. We make our 2/2 and pass over the turn to them. They have 5 cards in hand and start out with Lauren of the Third Path. This is going to target our Fable of the Mirror Breaker, and unfortunately we can't sacrifice our 2/2 with Make Disappear to counter the Lauren of the Third Path, because if we do that and they have any creature with 3 power, we instantly lose the game to Bankbuster. We go ahead and use that Make Disappear though to counter Wedding Announcement. We cycle Takenuma because we draw another land, and we get Bloodtithe Harvester for a couple reasons. Number 1, it's a blocker. Number 2, it gives us a blood token, which is additional redraw. And 3, it gives us just the right amount of mana to hold up our Disdainful Stroke, just in case opponent has a Wandering Emperor or another Sarah Paragon, because that would be just such a huge blowout, more than our opponent has blown us out already. Our opponent goes ahead and uses Laydown Arms on our Bloodtithe Harvester. What's new? They always have removal. They have the Sarah Paragon, which we can counter with our Disdainful Stroke because we didn't get a 3-mana creature and got our Bloodtithe Harvester. Plan is working out. We draw another land. We choose to discard Blackcleave Cliffs with our blood token. We draw another land. As you see my face in the video, I am very happy about this. Blood token discards the Darkslick Shores that we have, and we draw Abrade, which is interesting because we can kill one of the Bankbusters right now with them tapped out for mana, so they can't draw a card. But we choose not to because we want to kill a Bankbuster when it is attacking, because we don't want to take any more damage. We draw another land. It's a Darkslick Shores with Xander's Lounge. Opponent resolves the Eternal Wanderer, which we're not too happy about. They make a 2/2 double striker to try to get in for damage. We don't choose to Abrade because, once again, I want to Abrade them while they're attacking with a Bankbuster so that we don't die. We draw Invoke Despair, which is a huge draw. Not only do we get rid of the 2/2 and the Eternal Wanderer, we get rid of their ossification, which gives us our Corpse Appraiser back, get the chain reaction going. We exile one of the creatures from their graveyard, and we look at the top 3 cards of our library, which is 2 more lands. So we draw Go for the Throat, and this is terrible because Go for the Throat cannot get rid of Reckoner Bankbuster. So we have to use Go for the Throat on a Wandering Emperor token or a Sarah Paragon or something like that, which our opponent does not have at the moment. We draw Siphon Insight, which is very good. It's a lot of value. If we don't draw lands off our opponent's deck, we end up finding a Plains and a Stone Brain. You have to be kidding me. So many good cards in the opponent's deck, and we get a Stone Brain? We choose not to even cast it and pass the turn, because what are we going to call? I don't know, Wandering Emperor? They cast a Wandering Emperor that they have in hand, they minus and make a 2/2, and we're going to go ahead and either Abrade the 2/2, or I'm probably just going to Go for the Throat this, since we can't Go for the Throat anything else. We want to do it now because we don't want the Bankbuster to crew off of the 3/3 Wandering Emperor +1/+1 token on the 2/2. They cast Ambitious Farmhand, they trigger the ability, getting a Plains to their hand, and play the Plains. We're either going to Abrade if they try to attack with the Bankbuster, or Siphon Insight on their end step and try to find a really good Planeswalker or something. We find 2 lands off the top, of course. At least it's a Roadside Reliquary, and we have Stonebrain and Bankbuster, so we're probably going to get 1 draw off of this Roadside Reliquary eventually. In the response of us casting Stonebrain, because I guess I'm going to cast it since I don't have anything else better to do at the moment, opponent casts another Wandering Emperor in response. We use the Stonebrain, and we try to guess what we are going to try to lose to, and I think it's AO the Dawn Sky, because I currently don't have an answer to a 5/5, and I currently don't have an answer to a flyer, but I can probably handle everything else. We only have 1 copy of AO the Dawn Sky in their deck, so we get rid of that, but it's fine. We have Abrade, Bankbuster, and Darkslick Shores. I play a Bankbuster out of my hand because, at the very least, if they try to remove Corpse Appraiser with another removal spell, we can crew the Corpse Appraiser and still block. There's another Wandering Emperor in their hand, and I probably have to use Abrade on this 3/3 because if I crew the Corpse Appraiser and try to block, I'm going to try to bait them to cast the Wandering Emperor so I get rid of the other one and they have to legend rule it again. So we go ahead and try to use the Bankbuster to block the 3/3. They listen to me apparently and cast the Wandering Emperor and try to put a +1/+1 counter on the 3/3 Samurai to make it into a 4/4 first strike to get rid of my Bankbuster. Opponent listens to me and we go ahead and Abrade the 3/3, but these Bankbusters are still a huge problem. We can't pressure the Wandering Emperor and stay in the game long enough to not die to Reckoner Bankbuster making a 1/1 pilot and the other Bankbuster getting in for game. And of course, to add insult to injury, we draw another land. We use the Roadside Reliquary thanks to our opponent, and we draw Infernal Grasp. This is slightly better than Go for the Throat, since Infernal Grasp can actually get rid of an attacking Bankbuster this time, but we are kind of flooding out. We have Reckoner Bankbuster to draw a card, but I don't choose to do that on my turn, because if we do that and they have a removal spell, we can't crew with the Bankbuster and block. Our opponent draws a card, makes a pilot, draws a card again with the other Bankbuster, and these two Bankbusters are getting out of control. Keep in mind I already killed one on turn 3 of the game with Abrade. Bankbuster crews the Corpse Appraiser because they do have another laydown arms. What else is new? Opponent is going to crew their Bankbuster and probably put a 1/1 counter on it, but luckily for us we do have Infernal Grasp. Let's see what they do. They cast a Wedding Announcement, and if they attack with 2 creatures, they're going to get to draw a card, but that's okay. We're probably going to lose the game if we don't try to block here. I think about it for a second, and I'm like, wait, they could have Iganjo. I can probably take 2 damage here because they didn't choose to attack with the Bankbuster, so I take the 2. Wedding Announcement draws a card, I draw a card as well because it's their end step, and we draw a Bloodtithe Harvester. Not the best thing in the world, but I guess it gets rid of a pilot, or maybe the Ambitious Farmhand if they use that to become a 3/3. Eventually, it also gives us a redraw to discard this Haunted Ridge to draw another card, and hopefully it's not another land. Make Disappear is probably useless at this point in the game unless they really tap out, which I don't see happening. We draw a second copy of Reckoner Bankbuster, which is really good, but do we have enough time to utilize all this card draw? We're at 6 life, we have 1 creature, opponent has 3 creatures and a Wandering Emperor in play, and a Wedding Announcement, so you can really see how the card advantage from mono white can get out of control against this Grixis deck. They cast their 4th ossification of the game, I think. They cast it targeting Bloodtithe Harvester. We can go ahead and crew with the Bankbuster and try not to lose the game. You probably heard me say this a lot. They cast an Eternal Wanderer, and we have Make Disappear for the Eternal Wanderer because they tapped out, I guess. They have 1 mana left over, so they can't pay for it, and they go ahead and crew the Bankbuster on the 1/1 pilot. They're going to plus the Wandering Emperor and target Reckoner Bankbuster, but lucky for us, we drew our Infernal Grasp with exactly 2 mana to cast it. We go ahead and block the 2/2 Samurai with Vigilance and use Infernal Grasp on the Reckoner Bankbuster, and we're going to go ahead and see if we can survive. The good thing about this is they don't have any other open mana, and we have 2 Bankbusters for 2 additional redraws, and we have 12 mana to spare. So we'll see what we can do here. They draw an additional card at the end step, and we draw a Bladecoil Serpent. What an amazing draw off the top. We can discard their entire hand and draw a card at the expense of 1 life. The only problem with this is that if they top deck a removal spell, they can kill Bladecoil Serpent and attack in with 2 creatures for game. But I'm not too worried about that though, because there's a lot of the removal spells that are already out of the picture. They've used all of their ossifications. They've used like 3 laid-on arms. They've already used like 2 Lorn of the Third Paths. So what could they possibly have to get rid of this Bladecoil Serpent this late in the game after all of their resources have been exhausted? So we go ahead and pay our 6 black and 2 blue to discard their entire hand, and let's see if they have a Ganjo that we played around last turn, and they discard Eiganjo, Wedding Announcement, and Bankbuster, so they did have the Eiganjo, so we are rewarded. We don't draw a card immediately with Bankbuster because we need to crew this to block if they have lethal. They +1/+1 on an Ambitious Farmhand. They draw a land for turn, so the only thing I need to fade is them drawing a removal spell off this Roadside Reliquary. They're going to draw 2 cards. They cast Lorn of the Third Path. How many of these do they play? They cast Lorn of the Third Path, targeting Bladecoil Serpent. We use Reckoner Bankbuster to crew the Bladecoil Serpent to make ourselves a 4/4 creature. Opponent has an Ambitious Farmhand, a 1/1, and they also drew Cathar Commando. So what opponent can do is they can crew Cathar Commando with Reckoner Bankbuster, and then use the Cathar Commando with one of their last remaining mana to target our Reckoner Bankbuster to try to destroy an artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. We crew in response our Reckoner Bankbuster, and all we can do is watch after our opponent has had insane amount of value, but we tried our very best to stay in the game as long as possible, but we take the loss on this one in brutal fashion. Match 2 is a little bit better for us though, as we draw the Brotherhood's End for their huge board against Naya aggro, and we end up having to negate for their rabble rousing for their follow-up in game 1, followed up by an Invoke Despair, getting rid of one of their Wedding Announcements and sealing up the game with Reflection of Kiki-Jiki and Sheoldred the Apocalypse. In game 2, we end up having Reflection of Kiki-Jiki plus Bloodtithe Harvester after getting rid of some of their board, so that's a lockup on round 2 and going on to round 3. Nothing too interesting comes in game 1 of round 3 though, but I do find out some crucial information. They're playing Atraxa in their Rakdos midrange deck, which puts up some red flags for me. So I need to bring in this Make Disappear, Negate, and everything to stop the reanimation spells, because Atraxa is a very, very good card against me, and is one of the reasons why Grixis Midrange is falling a little bit out of favor. Atraxa is a card that when it enters the battlefield, Grixis Midrange almost always loses the game, since Atraxa can get up to 7 cards to the hand, depending on what kind of card types that you're playing. Maybe it's 6, I don't know, but it's a lot of cards, and usually this deck can't come back from the card advantage. One thing about this build that I'm playing though, is that Siphon Insight can get an Atraxa off of the opponent's library if we're lucky, and get to cast it for ourselves. We have to negate this Duress here, but we have Razorlash Transmogrant, and if opponent doesn't have a way to exile it, it's very, very good against the red-black midrange. We have Siphon Insight to get a couple lands, which we don't like since we already have 2 lands in hand, and they have a Sorin the Mirthless that we can't really let get out of control. We go ahead and attack the Sorin the Mirthless. We have Siphon Insight to use on their end step if we don't have to use Infernal Grasp or use this Abrade. I kind of want to use Siphon Insight because getting Atraxa off of their library is one of the ways that we can win the game against these other Atraxa decks. Duress comes down hitting our Abrade or our Infernal Grasp, but we just let him take one. That's fine with us. There's a Cruelty of Gix though, and this is the card that's the reanimate spell. They get to put a creature from the graveyard on the battlefield under their control, and here we go. Atraxa comes onto the battlefield, and this is not what we like to see. They get a bunch of cards to their hand, including Anoint Affliction, Duress, Fable the Mirror Breaker, and another copy of Atraxa. And the cool part about this Rakdos deck is they actually get to hardcast it if they have enough treasure tokens. They discard Atraxa to hand size though, which might mean they have another copy of Cruelty of Gix in their hand. We have a Takenuma, Abandoned Mire in our hand. I'm contemplating whether or not I want to use it. We play the Sulfurous Springs out of exile, just to show them that we got a land off the top of their library. And kind of unlucky. I want the Atraxa to block so I can double Abrade it, because there's no chance they know I have double Abrade, right? And all we have to do is kind of just hope and pray they don't have another reanimate spell for the Atraxa. They have exile removal for our Razorlash Transmogrant. They cast Liliana the Veil, which we have to negate. I mean, we don't really have to negate it, but it's still going to get out of control if we don't negate it, and we're going to try to draw another counterspell for a follow-up Cruelty of Gix, and just hope they don't have it. They attack him with the 2/2 Goblin Shaman, they cast Cruelty of Gix, and we're out of here as fast as possible. In game 3, we start off with a negate on Liliana, and it picks up from here. we get to actually cast Atraxa from their deck for our copy of Siphon Insight and win the game that way, getting a whole bunch of cards to our hand and win the game in game 3. We play round 4 against Grixis Midrange, and a last second Invoke Despair isn't enough as we try to stabilize Bloodtithe Harvester killing ours and attacking us for game with the Graveyard Trespasser. Game 2 isn't better than that, where they have an Undying Malice for a Phyrexian Flesh Gorger, turning into an 8/6 and casting their own Sheoldred while we're at 2 life. Our last second ditch effort to cast our Siphon Insight to get a go for the throat for Sheoldred is futile because we've already taken the damage from Sheoldred, so we lose round 4. On the bright side, if we win this round, we make the top 8. It starts off on a good note with Bladecoil Serpent attacking them for exactly 9 damage for lethal. That's about where our luck runs out though, as our opponent has a Thalia and it lasts till 6 turns later, and yes, that's the same Thalia. So we lose game 2. Game 3, this is for all the marbles. Our opponent starts out with the exact same Thalia. I'm pretty sure it's the exact same copy. We have to kill it. On turn 6 of the game, once again, we have Brotherhood's End followed up by an Infernal Grasp on the Sheoldred the Apocalypse, and we're at 3 life. And Ayo the Dawn Sky comes down. This isn't looking good as we don't have an answer, but subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this, and as always, peace.